Hey guys, so here we are, another video, and in this one we are going to look at the best way to set up lighting for your characters if you're intending to render them as transparent PNGs and superimposing them on another background. The best way to do that from a theory point of view is to separate them as much as you can from the background, but do it in a way that is ambiguous with regards to the direction of light, so that it doesn't look too out of place no matter where you put it in the scene. So as you can see, I've already jumped right into it, and I've put one of my characters in the scene looking at the camera using the rule of thirds for composition. And if I jump into NVIDIA Array mode, you can see that I've turned all of the HDRI off, and because we have no lights in the scene, it's completely black. I'm going to jump back into texture shaded mode and go back into perspective view so that we don't mess up the camera, which is all the way over there. Set it up a nice long way away from the working area so that I'm not going to be accidentally clicking on it or anything like that. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create a highlight or a rim light around the character that separates them from the background so that you can put them in most situations and they'll pop. And we're going to do that. We're going to use the create a new primitive tool. So we click on the button that looks like three primitives smushed together. Click on that, and we're going to make sure that it's set to plane, world center, Y positive, and all of that stuff doesn't really matter. Just leave it to 1 meter because we can change the size afterwards. And lo and behold, there you go. Now something else I'm going to do while I'm thinking about it is I'm going to set the character and the camera to unclickable so that if I run my mouse over it, I'm not going to accidentally do anything else. And to make absolutely sure, I'm going to select my character and my camera, and I'm going to create a new group. And I'm just going to leave it set to default group 1. And now I can turn off the mouse clickability of it, and I cannot now click on those objects at all. They are stuck in that group, they're not going anywhere. So again, just making sure that I'm not accidentally going to click on them and move them around because I've got them set up how I want. So with our plane selected, the first thing we need to do is make sure that we've got it in the right place, the right size and the right position. So we want to create a rim light around the back of the character. Now I'm going to use two separate light sources, one for the left, one for the right, and maybe even a third one for the top, just to make sure that I get as thorough and soft a one as possible. So the first thing we need to do is we need to rotate it around the x-axis to make sure that it's perfectly flat. We can input 90 degrees into there just to make sure that it is, and then we're going to move it behind the character. What we'll do is we will use the widget instead, because rotating it around the x-axis means it's difficult to get those X and Y right. So anyway, without faffing more, so we've got that pointed in roughly the right direction, but at the moment it's only pointed to her feet, so we want to lift it up so that it's kind of midway along her body. And then we're going to go into the parameters and we're going to change its scale. So we know that X is now that way along, so if we change it along its X-axis, we can make it taller. And we're going to make it wider anyway along the X-axis to make sure that it's nice and soft. And we don't need to change it on the Y because the Y is 0 because it's a plane. So we're going to quickly run back into here. And I'm just going to move this across ever so slightly. And back a bit. There we go. So we've got a nice big soft light source there. And we're going to now go into our surfaces tab with the plane selected, and we're going to change two things. The first thing we're going to do is turn the emission color by clicking on the emissions tab there, and we're going to change this to completely white, and we're going to change this to KCDMR squared at the bottom in the luminance units. And then we're going to go into geometry and we're going to change the cutout opacity to 0.0001. Like so, and that makes it almost entirely invisible. So if we now jump back into our camera 1 and we switch it into NVIDIA Array mode, we can see the results of what we've done so far. So as you can see, we've got a nice soft highlight down that side of her body. It's not crazy bright, so there's no blown out highlights, and it accentuates the shape of her jawline, her ear, and her arm, and her chest, and her hips. Basically everything on that side, pointing towards that. So I'm really happy with the results of that. So we're going to jump back out into texture shaded mode, and we're going to go into perspective view. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create another plane by clicking on the three shapes smushed together to create a new primitive. Leave that also at 1 meter and 1 meter. There we go. Now we could create a node instance of this one, but it would mean that any changes we make to one would translate across to the other, and we don't want that. So what we want to do is move this one over that way, and we're going to rotate it on the x-axis 90 degrees again, and then we're going to use our rotate widget to rotate it so that it's pointing towards our character, and we're going to elevate it to, I'm going to say about 120, so that it's about mid-height on the character. If I'm jumping too far ahead, by all means pause and see what I did and then catch up. So the next thing we want to do is we want to change the scales again. So we're going to change the x-axis to make this one nice and fat, and then the z-axis to make it nice and tall. And now we're going to go into our surfaces tab and into the emission, and we're going to change this one to completely white, like so. Change this to k-CDMR squared as well. Now this one is going to be further forward and closer. Not a huge amount, but close enough that you're going to notice a difference. So we're going to click on the geometry tab, and we're going to drop this one down to 0.0001 as well. Jump back into camera 1, and we're going to turn off the first plane so that we can see this plane's effects on its own without polluting the effect. So as you can see, this one illuminates a bit more of the subject, so I'm actually thinking that that's probably a bit too much, so we can drop that back and we can go into our Z translate, and we can make this maybe minus 75. See what difference that makes. That's more like it. It's more than the previous plane, but not so much that it's gonna knacker our effect. So let's turn on this plane and let's see what the two look like together. So we've got a nice highlight on both sides of the character, but the main features of the bodies are not kind of illuminated yet. So the last thing I want to do before we start with the main light is I'm going to create a slight one for the hair at the top. So we're going to switch back to texture shaded mode, jump out of perspective, jump into perspective mode. Now because these two I'm happy with, I'm going to turn their clickability off so that we don't accidentally drag the mouse over that, like so. Now we're going to create another new primitive, and it's going to be the same as the previous one, so we just click on accept. Now this time, because it's going to be overhead, we don't need to make huge adjustments. We're just going to rotate it on the Z axis a little bit and then drag it upwards and backwards slightly, like so. So that's creating a light overhead, which is exactly what we want. Now back into our surfaces tab, back into the emission for that plane, set this one to white, change this to k-CDMR squared as well, and change the cutout opacity to 0.0001. Now we're going to brighten this one slightly because we know that it's not going to, because it's black hair, it's illuminating, it needs to be a little bit brighter. So we're going to change this one to 2500 instead of 1500. Jump into our camera 1 and switch to NVIDIA iRay mode and see what happens. So So as you can see, we've got a nice subtle highlight on the top of her head now, which just gives us a little bit of separation from the black, so you can make out the entire outline of the character now, even on a black background, which is precisely what we want. So before I do anything else, I'm going to turn off the clickability of that plane as well, jump back into texture shaded mode, and come into perspective mode so we don't accidentally move that camera. So we've now got our three main rim lights. Now all we need to do is illuminate the front of the character. Now this is where we can be a little bit more creative if we wanted to. We could put colored lights, we could do all sorts of things, but we're going to keep this one nice and simple. So we're going to create another primitive. It's going to be a plane, and we're going to select it, come into our parameters tab, and we're going to rotate it on the x-axis so that it's exactly perpendicular to the character. We're going to move it away, and we're going to move it up so that it's more level with her face. Now you're wondering why it's not directly central to our body, and the reason for that is that we, generally speaking, want to illuminate the face more than anything else. So we're going to make sure that our light source is most level, the center of it is almost level with the face of the character, so that the majority of the light is hitting the face. Now we're going to quickly go into our top view mode by clicking on the green section of our square there. Click on our rotate node, rotate widget even, and we're going to rotate it so that it's pointed directly at the character's face. Now you notice that I'm slightly over to one side here. That is intentional, and it's not because the light is going to be blocking the camera. Because we're going to set the transparencies very low, we don't really care about that. I just want it to be as realistic as possible. So we're having the light offset slightly to one side, like so. Now we can change the emission of that surface, and we're gonna change the emission color to white again. We could make it a little bit warmer, give it a slight hint of yellow, I mean a very, very tiny hint of yellow. We're going to change our luminance units to kcdmi squared, and this time we're going to set this up to about 3000, and we'll see where that leaves us. So we're going to change the geometry to cutout opacity 00001 again, jump into our camera one, and switch to NVIDIA IREM mode, and let's see what we've got. And this is the beautiful thing about Daz Studio, is that we can tweak and adjust as much as we need to. So I'm thinking that this is perhaps a fraction overexposed, so we can go back to the emission of this one, plane 4 that is, and we can turn that back down to maybe 2500 and see where that is. See where that leaves us. And that looks pretty good to me. We've got a nice dimension, we've got plenty of light hitting the front of the character, we've got those highlights separating her from the background like so. And that's really all there is to it. That's a really basic way of creating a PNG file that we can superimpose on any background with a view to using this. Perhaps this PNG will be used over and over again in various different dialogues. Perhaps this will be a side image in your Ren'Py project. This allows you to reuse that PNG file as many times as you want to in different backgrounds, and it shouldn't look too out of place no matter where you're using it. As always, if you found this video useful, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the notification icon, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.